Mara had been running for so long that she could no longer remember what peace felt like. 3 years had passed since the alien hunters first discovered her location on the forgotten moon of Kepler-7. She was alone then, just a single elf woman with nothing but a damaged communication device and the clothes on her back. The ship that had brought her there crashed during landing, and all the other passengers were dead. She had walked through the frozen wasteland for 3 days before finding shelter in a cave system, deep beneath the surface. That was where she met Storm for the first time. The dragon was wounded with a deep gash across his left wing and blood dripping from his mouth. He was trapped in a cage made from energy bars left behind by poachers who had hunted him for his scales. The scales of dragons were valuable across the entire galaxy. They could be used to make weapons that could destroy entire planets. Mara had no reason to help this creature. She did not know him. But when their eyes met, something changed inside her. She saw intelligence in his gaze, a consciousness as deep as any being she had ever encountered. She spent 2 days deactivating the energy cage using pieces of technology from the crashed ship. Storm watched her work, never moving, never attacking her. When the cage finally fell away, the dragon could have killed her easily. Instead, he lowered his massive head and touched his forehead to hers. That simple gesture meant something profound. It meant gratitude. It meant trust. It meant the beginning of a friendship that would change both their lives forever. Storm's wing healed slowly over the weeks that followed. Mara used every medical skill she possessed to help him recover. She had been trained in the ancient elf ways, including healing magic that most beings in the modern galaxy thought was nothing but myth. She sang to him in the old language, the tongue of her ancestors, songs that helped bone grow and flesh mend. Storm responded to these songs in ways that surprised her. He would hum along with her, his voice like distant thunder rolling across mountains. On the day Storm could finally fly again, he took her outside the cave and showed her 2 more dragons hiding in the ice canyons. Ember was a young dragon, barely 5 years old, with scales that shimmered red and gold like flames dancing in firelight. She was curious and playful, diving through the air and performing tricks that made Mara laugh for the first time since her ship had crashed. Zephyr was different. He was the oldest of the 3, with scars covering his body from countless battles. His eyes held sadness and memories of pain, but he also had wisdom that came from surviving the impossible. The 4 of them bonded quickly. Mara discovered that dragons were not mindless beasts as the galaxy believed. They were intelligent, emotional, and capable of complex communication. They could share their thoughts through touch, and Mara learned to understand their feelings when she placed her hand on their scales. Storm was protective and brave, always willing to face danger to keep his family safe. Ember was joyful and adventurous, always pushing boundaries and exploring new places. Zephyr was thoughtful and patient, often offering guidance through his ancient knowledge. 3 months after meeting Storm, Mara's communication device finally received a signal. It was a message from Victoria, a human soldier stationed on a nearby space station. Victoria had been searching for Mara for years, following rumors and legends of an elf woman who had survived the Great War. The humans had been tracking alien movements, and they knew that Mara was in danger. Victoria sent coordinates for a secret meeting place, a location that even the alien hunters would not expect her to go. The journey to the meeting point was dangerous. The alien hunters had become more aggressive, launching attacks more frequently. On 2 separate occasions, they were forced to hide in asteroid fields while enemy ships passed overhead. On one terrible night, a hunter ship managed to destroy a section of the ice canyon where they were resting. Rocks fell from above like meteorites, and it seemed certain that they would all die buried under tons of stone. But Storm shielded Mara with his own body, protecting her from the falling debris while Ember and Zephyr used their combined strength to push the largest rocks away from them. Mara realized during that moment that these dragons loved her just as she loved them. They were not creatures she had saved. They were not her pets or her servants. They were her family, and she would do anything to protect them just as they protected her. When they finally reached the coordinates Victoria had sent, they found a small research outpost hidden inside a mountain range. Victoria was waiting for them at the entrance, and she was not alone. She had brought 5 other soldiers, all of them human, all of them armed and ready for combat. Mara felt fear rise in her heart. Were these people here to capture her? Were the humans part of the conspiracy to find her? Victoria stepped forward slowly, keeping her hands visible and empty. She introduced herself and her team. She explained that humans had been watching the alien hunters for many years. They knew about the map hidden in Mara's DNA, the genetic code that carried information about an ancient gateway hidden somewhere in the outer reaches of the galaxy. This gateway contained technology so advanced that it could change the balance of power in the entire universe. Whoever controlled the gateway would control everything. The aliens wanted the gateway to use its power as a weapon. They believed they could dominate every other civilization in existence. But the humans wanted something different. The humans wanted to make sure that the gateway remained hidden, protected, and never used. Victoria explained that humans had a strange philosophy. They believed that some power was too dangerous to ever have. They believed that the only way to survive in a universe full of chaos and violence was to show mercy and restraint. This was why Mara trusted her immediately. The elves had lost this philosophy centuries ago. They had become fearful and isolated, guarding their knowledge and their power instead of sharing it. But humans, fragile and short-lived as they were, had somehow maintained the wisdom to know when power should be refused. They understood that winning by holding back was sometimes the greatest victory of all. Victoria offered Mara shelter in the research outpost. She offered her protection, resources, and most importantly, she offered her friendship. The dragons were hesitant at first, their instincts warning them to be careful around strangers. But Mara trusted Victoria, and the dragons trusted Mara, so they agreed to stay. That night, for the first time in 3 years, Mara slept without fear. She knew that the aliens would still hunt her, and she knew that dangers still awaited her in the future. But she also knew that she was no longer alone. Victoria told her stories about Earth, the human homeworld. She talked about mountains that reached so high they touched the clouds, about oceans so vast that a person could spend their entire life crossing them and never reach the other side. She talked about human cities where millions of beings lived together, helping each other, creating art and music and stories. She talked about human history, about how humans had survived ice ages and wars and famines, always climbing forward, always reaching toward the future. As Mara listened, she realized that humans were not weak at all. They were the strongest beings in the galaxy because they refused to give up, because they could see beauty even in tragedy, because they could love even their enemies. The dragons listened too, and they began to understand why Mara had made her choice to trust these humans. In the warm firelight of the research outpost, with her dragons beside her and her new human friend across from her, Mara finally began to believe that survival might be possible after all. 2 weeks passed inside the research outpost, and Mara began to understand more about Victoria and her mission. The human soldier was not just a simple fighter. She was also a strategist, a scientist, and a person who carried tremendous responsibility on her shoulders. Victoria had been given command of this outpost because she had proven herself worthy many times over. She had survived battles that would have killed ordinary soldiers. She had made impossible decisions that saved millions of lives. Victoria spent hours each day with Mara and the dragons, learning their language and their ways. She was fascinated by the fact that dragons could communicate through touch and through sounds that no human ear could normally hear. Zephyr, the eldest dragon, seemed to take a special interest in Victoria. The old dragon would sit near her while she worked, and sometimes he would rest his massive head on her lap like a pet cat seeking affection. Victoria never showed fear around the dragons, which earned her their respect and eventually their friendship. The aliens did not leave them alone for long. On the 16th day, the sensors detected a massive attack force approaching the outpost. The alien hunters had finally found their location. Victoria called an emergency meeting with her team and explained their situation. They had 3 options. They could fight and probably lose. They could run and abandon the outpost. Or they could use Mara and the dragons as bait in an elaborate trap to destroy the hunters once and for all. Mara volunteered for the trap immediately. She refused to run anymore. She was tired of being hunted like an animal. Victoria argued against it, saying that the risk was too great, but Mara stood firm. The dragons backed her decision. They stepped forward and released a unified roar that shook the entire outpost. They were ready to fight. They were ready to end this running. The plan was complicated but brilliant. Victoria would send a false signal to the alien hunters, letting them think that Mara was trying to escape with her dragons. The hunters would pursue them across the ice fields toward a narrow canyon that had been specially prepared. As soon as the hunters entered the canyon, Victoria's team would activate massive explosives that would bring down the canyon walls and trap the enemy ships. It was dangerous and uncertain, but it was their best chance. Mara climbed onto Storm's back as the first enemy ships appeared on the horizon. Ember and Zephyr took positions on either side of her. Victoria watched from the outpost as they began their flight toward the canyon. The three dragons flew low across the frozen landscape, moving as if they were fleeing in terror. Behind them, the alien hunter ships opened fire, sending weapons blasts that created explosions of ice and snow. The canyon entrance appeared ahead, and the dragons dove toward it. The enemy ships followed without hesitation, hungry for their prey. Mara could feel her heart pounding in her chest. Everything depended on timing. Victoria had to wait until the last moment to seal the trap. If she acted too early, the enemy would escape. If she acted too late, Mara and the dragons would be trapped inside the canyon with the hunters. Storm's powerful wings beat against the air as they plunged deeper into the canyon. The walls rose higher and higher on either side of them. Mara could see the alien ships banking sharply, trying to maintain pursuit even in the narrow space. They were so focused on their prey that they did not notice the explosive charges that had been carefully placed along the canyon rim. Suddenly, Mara felt Storm tilt his wing and bank sharply upward. It was the signal they had agreed on. The dragon pulled up hard, climbing toward the sky. Ember and Zephyr followed instantly. Behind them, the alien ships were still descending into the canyon, unable to stop their forward momentum. Victoria pressed the detonation button. The canyon walls exploded with force that could be heard from miles away. Massive sections of rock and ice collapsed downward, sealing the canyon entrance and trapping the enemy ships inside. But the dragons were already clear, bursting out into open sky just before the walls came down. Mara heard the terrible sounds of the ships being crushed, the screaming of the alien hunters as their vessels were destroyed. It was over in seconds. The great hunt had ended. The dragons landed back at the outpost and Victoria ran out to meet them. Mara dismounted from Storm's back and fell into Victoria's arms. Both of them were crying, overwhelmed by the intensity of the moment and the success of their plan. Behind them, Zephyr lowered his head and released a low, mournful sound. He was saying goodbye. The old dragon knew that the hunters were gone now and his time had come. Over the next 3 days, Zephyr grew weak. Mara knew that he was dying. Dragons lived for hundreds of years, but Zephyr was ancient even by dragon standards. He had lived through wars and heartbreak and loss. The final battle had taken the last of his strength. He spent his final hours with his head resting on Mara's lap, and she sang to him in the old elf language, the songs of her ancestors that spoke of peace and rest and the joy of a life well lived. When Zephyr died, it was quietly, with Mara and Victoria sitting beside him. Storm and Ember mourned their companion, releasing mournful sounds that echoed across the ice fields. Mara understood their grief because she felt it too. Zephyr had been more than just a dragon. He had been a friend, a teacher, and a guide through the darkness. Victoria ordered that Zephyr be given a funeral ceremony with full military honors. She had her team build a huge fire on the ice plains, and they burned Zephyr's body in the old way, sending his spirit up to the sky in smoke and ash. Victoria spoke words about courage and sacrifice and how some beings shine so brightly that their light never truly fades away. After Zephyr's death, everything changed. The danger had passed and Mara was no longer running. Victoria invited her to stay permanently at the outpost, offering her a position as an advisor and as a bridge between humans and dragons. Mara accepted. She began to work with Victoria on her research, helping her understand dragon biology and dragon history. She also began to teach some of Victoria's soldiers the basic language of the dragons, the tones and touches that allowed communication. Storm and Ember settled into the outpost, becoming part of the human community. Ember especially loved this new life. She would spend hours playing with the soldiers, letting them ride on her back across the ice fields. Storm was more reserved, but he formed a deep bond with Victoria. The human soldier and the dragon became inseparable companions. They understood each other in ways that went beyond language or species. They both carried the weight of leadership, the burden of making choices that affected many lives. 3 months after arriving at the outpost, Mara received a message from somewhere in the galaxy. It was from other elves, survivors of her kind who had managed to hide during the wars. They had heard stories of an elf woman who had befriended dragons and humans. They wanted to make contact. They wanted to learn if there was hope for their dying civilization. Mara showed the message to Victoria, and the human soldier smiled. She told Mara that this was how the universe would heal, different species working together, sharing knowledge and strength, helping each other rebuild what had been destroyed. It was the beginning of something new, something that had never existed before. Mara looked out across the ice fields toward where the dragons were playing, their scales glimmering in the sunlight. She thought about how her life had changed in just a few months. She had gone from being a hunted fugitive to being part of something greater than herself. She had found family in the most unexpected places, and she had discovered that hope was not something that died when you lost everything. Hope was something that could be born again, stronger and more beautiful than before. The message from the other elves was encrypted and coded with ancient symbols that only true elves could decipher. Mara spent an entire day translating it, and what she discovered filled her with both joy and sadness. There were survivors, yes, but not many. Perhaps 2,000 elves still lived scattered across hidden colonies in distant star systems. They had been in hiding for so long that they had nearly forgotten who they were. They needed guidance. They needed hope. Most importantly, they needed to know that they were not alone. Victoria helped Mara compose a response that would reach the elves safely. The human soldier understood the importance of this communication. She knew that the rebirth of an entire civilization depended on getting this message right. They sent it through secret channels that the alien hunters had never discovered, ancient relay stations that had been built thousands of years ago when the galaxy was younger. The response came back quickly. The elves wanted a meeting. They sent coordinates for a neutral location, a space station in the Andromeda region that had been abandoned for centuries. They also sent something else, something that made Mara gasp when she received it. It was a recording of her parents, made before they died in the war. It showed them speaking about her, about their hope that she would survive, about their dream that she would somehow help save their people. Mara watched the recording while sitting in Storm's presence. The dragon could sense her emotions through their connection, and he pushed his massive head against her chest in comfort. She cried, but they were healing tears, tears that came from finally releasing pain that she had carried for so many years. Victoria sat with her during this time, offering her presence without words. This was a gift that humans had. They understood that sometimes the most powerful thing one being could offer another was simply to be there, to witness their grief and validate it. The journey to the meeting point took 2 weeks. Victoria assembled a team of 12 soldiers, the ones she trusted most, the ones who had proven themselves in battle. Mara rode on Storm's back with Ember flying alongside them. They traveled through space in a specially modified ship that could accommodate the dragons. The craft had been designed to transport large creatures, with reinforced floors and massive cargo holds. Ember loved this part of the journey. She would run through the corridors, her claws clicking against the metal floor, exploring every corner of the ship like a curious child. The space station appeared on their sensors after 13 days of travel. It was enormous, a massive wheel of metal and concrete floating in the void, silent and seemingly abandoned. But as they approached, lights began to flicker to life. The ancient station systems were still functional. Someone had maintained it over the centuries, waiting for a day like this, waiting for the elves to return. As they docked and entered the station, Mara felt a strange sensation. She was walking through history. This station had been built by her ancestors, and she could feel their presence in every corridor, in every room. The architecture was distinctly elven, with high ceilings and elegant curves that flowed into each other like water frozen in time. The other elves were waiting in the great hall. Mara counted only 18 of them, far fewer than she had hoped. They were led by an ancient elf named Lydia, a woman whose face carried the wisdom of centuries. When Lydia saw Mara, she fell to her knees. The other elves followed, bowing before her as if she were royalty. Mara felt uncomfortable with this display of respect, but Victoria whispered to her that this was how elves showed honor to those who brought hope. Lydia told Mara about what had happened to their people. The wars had nearly destroyed them completely. The alien hunters and other warlike species had attacked the elven worlds over and over again. The elves, who were warriors but not conquerors, had tried to negotiate and make peace, but their enemies saw mercy as weakness. They were hunted until only scattered colonies remained, hidden in places so remote that few beings even knew they existed. The elves had stopped having children. They had lost the will to continue. They believed their time had ended, that they were meant to fade away quietly into history. But now, seeing Mara with her dragons and her human friends, they began to believe that perhaps redemption was still possible. Mara told them about the humans. She explained how Victoria and her people had helped her, not because they wanted something in return, but because they believed it was the right thing to do. She talked about how humans possessed a quality that the elves had lost, a fierce determination to survive and create beauty, even when facing overwhelming darkness. Victoria then stood up and addressed the elves. She told them that humans had always believed in second chances. They believed that no being, no matter how diminished or weakened, was beyond redemption. She offered the strength of the human military to protect the elf colonies. She offered technology and resources to help rebuild their civilization. But most importantly, she offered something that had no price. She offered friendship and alliance. The dragons emerged from the ship into the Great Hall. Storm's entrance was particularly impressive. The ancient space station seemed to tremble as the massive dragon stepped forward, his scales reflecting the light and creating a shimmering display of silver and blue. The elves gasped in wonder. They had seen dragons before, but not like this. These dragons moved with intelligence and grace, and they clearly were partners with the humans and the elf woman. Lydia approached Storm carefully and placed her hand on his nose. The dragon lowered his head in respect. In that moment, something shifted. The elves began to see a new future, a future where humans and elves and dragons could work together to create something beautiful and strong. Over the next week, Mara and Victoria worked with Lydia and her council to create a plan for rebuilding the elf civilization. They would establish new settlements not hidden and isolated anymore, but connected to human worlds and protected by human technology. They would encourage young elves to have children again, to believe in a future worth living for. They would share elf knowledge with humans and learn from human culture in return. Most importantly, they would form an alliance unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Humans and elves working together as equals, both contributing their unique strengths. The dragons would be symbols of this unity, bridges between the two species that showed what was possible when different beings chose cooperation over conflict. As Mara stood in the great hall of the ancient station, looking at the faces of her people and her friends, she realized that this was what Zephyr had been fighting for when he gave his life in the final battle. This moment, this hope, this new beginning. Ember landed on her shoulder and made a soft chirping sound. The young dragon was content. She had a family now that extended beyond just her dragon companions. She had humans to play with and elves who marveled at her beauty. She had purpose and belonging. The stars seemed brighter that night as Mara looked out through the station's observation windows. The old wounds of the galaxy were beginning to heal, not overnight, but slowly and surely. And in the center of it all was an elf woman, 2 dragons, and a human soldier named Victoria, working together to create a new future. 6 months passed since the meeting at the ancient station. The alliance between humans and elves had grown stronger every day. New settlements had been established on 3 different planets, each one carefully chosen for its natural defenses and its potential to support life. Young elves were being born again for the first time in generations. The sound of elf children laughing in the halls was something Lydia had never thought she would hear again. Mara had taken on an official position as ambassador between the 2 species. She traveled between human and elf worlds, helping them understand each other, solving conflicts when they arose, and building bridges where there had been only barriers before. Victoria had been promoted to general, commanding the military defense force that protected both humans and elves from the threat of alien invasion. Storm and Ember had become heroes in both civilizations. Stories were told about their battles against the alien hunters, about their loyalty to Mara, and about their role in bringing the 2 species together. Young humans and young elves both wanted to ride on the dragons' backs. Storm had grown patient with this attention, though he clearly preferred the company of Victoria and Mara. Ember loved the adoration. She performed aerial tricks and dives that thrilled audiences on both worlds. But danger was never far away. The alien hunters had not disappeared completely. They had merely gone into hiding, regrouping and rebuilding their forces. Intelligence reports indicated that they were planning a massive invasion, one that would be far larger and more destructive than anything that had come before. The hunters wanted to destroy both the human and elf civilizations before the alliance could become too strong. Victoria called an emergency council meeting with Mara, Lydia, and the commanders of the military forces. The meeting took place on a neutral space station, halfway between human and elf territories. As they studied the intelligence reports and the projected invasion timeline, the reality of their situation became clear. They had perhaps 6 months before the attack came. 6 months to prepare, to strengthen their defenses, to make themselves ready for war. Lydia was in favor of attacking first, striking at the alien hunter bases before they could launch their invasion. Victoria disagreed with this strategy. She explained to the council that attacking first would make them appear as aggressors to other civilizations that might otherwise remain neutral. The humans had learned through long history that sometimes the strongest position was to be defensive, to show that you fought only when forced to fight. Mara proposed a different solution. She suggested that they use the time to reach out to other species in the galaxy, to build a larger alliance against the alien hunters. If they could convince other civilizations to unite against this common threat, they would be far more powerful. The hunters would see that they were outnumbered and outmatched, and they might reconsider their invasion plans. Victoria loved this idea. She immediately began sending messages to all the species that had neutral or positive relations with humans. She sent offers of alliance, promises of mutual defense and shared knowledge. The responses came back slowly, but they came. The crystalline beings from the Zephyr region sent a message of support. The amphibious species from the water worlds agreed to help. Even some of the merchant civilizations who usually stayed out of military conflicts promised to withhold trade from the alien hunters if they attacked. Within 3 months, an alliance had been formed. 14 different species coming from 14 different worlds united under one banner. The defense force that Victoria commanded was now much larger and much more diverse. There were beings made of energy, beings made of crystalline structures, beings of pure intelligence that had no physical form at all. Each species brought unique weapons and unique abilities to the alliance. Mara worked with leaders from each species, teaching them about the dragons and about the power that could come from cooperation between different beings. She discovered that several of the allied species had their own creatures that were similar to dragons, creatures that had been isolated on their home worlds for centuries. With Victoria's help, they managed to bring some of these creatures to meet Storm and Ember. The meetings were cautious at first, but eventually, the various dragon-like beings formed their own bonds of friendship. Storm seemed especially interested in these new creatures. He would spend hours communicating with them, teaching them about his experiences fighting the alien hunters. It was as if the great dragon understood that the upcoming war would be different than anything any of them had faced before. This battle would not be just between individual warriors or small groups. This battle would be between civilizations, between entire ways of life. The alien hunters made their first move exactly as Victoria had predicted. They launched raids against the Allied territories, trying to provoke the alliance into fracturing. They attacked a human mining colony and an elf settlement on opposite sides of the galaxy. They destroyed a small trading post that belonged to the crystalline beings. Each attack was calculated to maximize fear and minimize direct military engagement. But the alliance held firm. The species that had been attacked were supported by all the others. Resources were shared freely. Wounded soldiers were treated in hospitals on worlds that would normally have refused to help foreign fighters. The unity of the alliance became stronger with each attack, not weaker. The alien hunters had made a terrible miscalculation. 3 months before the invasion was scheduled to begin, Victoria made a stunning announcement. She told Mara and Lydia that intelligence had discovered the location of the alien hunter homeworld. It was in a star system that was heavily defended, but it was not impregnable. If the alliance struck now with overwhelming force, they could eliminate the threat permanently. They could attack the hunters' most important military installations and destroy their ability to launch the planned invasion. But this decision terrified both Mara and Lydia. Such an attack would be an act of war against the entire alien hunter civilization. It would not be a defense against invasion, but rather a preemptive strike. It would make the alliance look like aggressors, just as Lydia had feared months before. The victory might be hollow if they won the battle, but lost the moral high ground in the process. Victoria sat quietly for a long time before responding. She told them about the human concept of just war, about how sometimes violence was justified if it prevented greater harm. She explained that the alien hunters had shown themselves to be conquerors and enslavers. They had attacked peaceful species without provocation. Allowing them to continue their expansion would result in the suffering and death of billions of innocent lives. Mara made the final decision. She told Victoria that they would attack, but only if they gave the alien hunters a chance to surrender first. They would send an ultimatum, a message offering the hunters one last opportunity to lay down their weapons and join the Alliance as peaceful members of the galaxy. If the hunters refused, then the Alliance would have no choice but to defend itself. Victoria smiled when she heard this. She said that this was the kind of mercy and wisdom that would define the new Alliance. She said that humans had learned that sometimes the strongest warriors were the ones willing to offer peace even to their enemies. Even when that offer was sure to be rejected, the ultimatum was sent through every channel, in every language that the alien hunters could understand. For 2 weeks there was silence, and then the response came. The alien hunters' leader, a being whose name could not be properly pronounced in most languages, sent back a message. It was simple and brutal. The hunters rejected the offer. They were ready for war. Mara, Victoria, Lydia, and the other Alliance leaders made their preparations. In 1 week, the greatest military force that the galaxy had ever seen would launch its attack on the alien hunter homeworld. Everything they had worked for, everything they had built together would be tested in the fires of battle. The dragons were ready. The soldiers were ready. The Alliance was ready. But in her heart, Mara still felt the weight of what was about to happen. War was never clean or simple. Even in a just cause, people would die. Species would suffer. The galaxy would be forever changed. As she stood with Storm on a high platform overlooking a human city at night, watching the stars shine above them, Mara whispered a prayer in the old elf language. She prayed for strength, for courage, and for the wisdom to see that even in victory, there would be loss. The battle began at dawn on a morning that no being in the Alliance would ever forget. Thousands of ships emerged from hyperspace near the alien hunter homeworld. A coordinated arrival that had been planned down to the smallest detail. Victoria's command ship was at the center of the formation, flanked by elf warships and vessels from all the allied species. Storm and Ember flew ahead of the main fleet, their forms dwarfing the smaller fighter craft that surrounded them. The alien hunter defense force rose to meet the Alliance like a swarm of insects disturbed in their nest. Ships erupted from the planet's surface and from hidden orbital stations. Weapons fire filled the space between the worlds, creating a display of destruction that was terrible and beautiful in its own way. The Alliance ships responded with disciplined precision. Each species had trained for this moment, and each fought with the skill of warriors who understood that their survival depended on perfect coordination. Mara flew with Storm at the front of the attack, accompanied by a squadron of dragon-like creatures from the allied worlds. There was a being of pure crystalline structure, whose form refracted light into every color of the spectrum. There was a creature from the water worlds, a massive thing that seemed to swim through space as if it were an ocean. There was another true dragon, brought from a hidden colony discovered only months before the war began. Together, these magnificent creatures created a vanguard that nothing could withstand. The alien hunters had not expected dragons. They had not expected that the Alliance would have allies who could match them in raw power. Their ships began to fall, torn apart by dragonfire and crystal light. But the hunters did not retreat. They pressed forward, trying to break through the dragon formation and reach the Alliance's command ship. They were willing to sacrifice everything, willing to lose all their vessels if it meant getting one clear shot at Victoria and the other Alliance leaders. Victoria coordinated the battle from her command center, her voice calm and steady, even as explosions rocked the ship around her. She guided squadrons to intercept incoming fire, redirected defensive energy shields to protect vulnerable sectors, and made split-second decisions that saved thousands of lives. This was what humans did so well, Mara realized. They remained calm under pressure. They made decisions based on logic rather than fear or emotion. The battle raged for 8 hours. By the end, the alien hunter fleet had been almost completely destroyed. Their defense installations on the planet had been neutralized. Their military infrastructure had been shattered. But the cost was high. Hundreds of Alliance vessels had been lost. Tens of thousands of soldiers and civilians had died. Even some of the dragon-like creatures had fallen. Their sacrifice remembered even in the midst of ongoing battle. When the last enemy ship surrendered or was destroyed, a strange silence fell over the battlefield. The Alliance had won. The greatest threat to the galaxy had been eliminated. But the victory felt hollow to those who had survived, who carried the weight of all those who had not. Victoria sent a message to the alien hunter leadership still alive on the planet. She offered them the same choice she had offered before the war began. They could surrender completely and accept terms of peace, or they could continue fighting and face total annihilation. This time the hunters accepted the surrender offer. Their civilization was broken. Their military power was gone. They had no choice but to accept the Alliance's terms. The peace negotiations took 3 months. The Alliance established a governing council that included representatives from all the allied species, including the alien hunters. Restrictions were placed on weapons development and military spending. Resources that had been used for war were redirected toward reconstruction and rebuilding. The alien hunters, who had once been conquerors and hunters of other species, were forced to become students of peace and cooperation. Mara played a crucial role in these negotiations. She brought the perspective of the elves, a species that had been nearly destroyed but had survived through unity with other beings. She brought the perspective of the dragons, creatures that were powerful enough to conquer but chose instead to help others. She brought the human values of mercy and second chances that Victoria had taught her to understand and appreciate. One day during the negotiations, the alien hunter leader, a massive being covered in armor and weapons that could no longer be used, asked to speak with Mara privately. The elf woman was nervous as she entered the meeting chamber, but she kept her fear hidden. The alien hunter bowed before her, a gesture that was deeply uncomfortable for his species but which he made anyway. He told Mara that he had been wrong. He had believed that power was the only currency that mattered in the galaxy, that strength was everything and mercy was weakness. But he had been defeated not through overwhelming force alone, but through unity and cooperation. He had seen beings from different species working together, trusting each other, sacrificing for each other. This was something he had never encountered before. It had changed his understanding of what power truly meant. The alien hunter asked Mara if there was a possibility of redemption for his people, if they could learn to live as part of the Alliance rather than as conquered enemies. Mara considered this question carefully before answering. She told him that the dragons had taught her something important. She had learned that violence and hunting had made the dragons strong in one way, but friendship and trust had made them even stronger. The path forward would be difficult, but it was possible. His people could rebuild themselves as something better than they had been before. 3 years passed after the Great War. The Alliance grew stronger every day. The alien hunters, stripped of their military power and forced to cooperate with other species, gradually began to change their culture and their values. Young hunters learned peaceful trades and studied philosophy instead of warfare. Some of them even began to show interest in the dragons, in understanding these magnificent creatures that had played such a crucial role in changing the galaxy. Mara stood with Victoria on a balcony, overlooking a new city that had been built by the combined efforts of humans, elves, and hunters. Below them, Storm and Ember played with young members of all 3 species. The dragons had become symbols of unity, symbols of what was possible when different beings worked together. Storm seemed content with his life, his days of fierce battles behind him. Ember was teaching young dragons from other worlds how to fly and how to understand the humans and elves who lived among them. Victoria placed a hand on Mara's shoulder and told her that she had been thinking about what would happen after both of them grew old. She wanted to establish a permanent council that could continue the work of keeping the Alliance strong. She wanted Mara to help her create an institution that would teach future generations about cooperation and peace. She wanted to make sure that what they had built together would last not just for their lifetimes, but for hundreds of years to come. Mara agreed without hesitation. She knew that the real victory in war was not the defeat of the enemy, but the creation of something better afterward. She knew that Storm and Ember and all the dragon-like creatures would live on for centuries after she was gone, and they would continue to teach new generations about friendship and loyalty and the power of unity. That evening, as Mara sat with Victoria watching the sunset, she thought about how much had changed. She had come to this moon 3 years ago as a hunted fugitive with nothing but hope and the strength of her dragons. Now she was an ambassador, a leader, a bridge between species. She had watched her people, the elves, reclaim their place in the galaxy, not through conquest but through wisdom and cooperation. She had learned from humans what it meant to persist, to believe in the impossible, to never give up. Storm rested his massive head on her lap, and Mara felt the familiar warmth of their connection. She closed her eyes and sent a thought through their bond, gratitude and love and a sense of completion. The great journey was not over. Challenges would continue to arise, but they would face them together, humans and elves and dragons united in a way that had never been possible before. And that, Mara believed, was the real victory. Not conquest or power or dominance, but unity and peace and the creation of something beautiful that had never existed before, and that would endure long after all of them were gone.